Hey guys, Terry here from the Culture-neer podcast. Listen, I want to personally invite you out to an event that we're going to be hosting at Legacy Farm on February the 24th called The Ripple Effect. Listen, if you're a team lead, entrepreneur, solopreneur, nonprofit leader, coach, if you're in any kind of position of influence or aspiring to be in one of those kind of positions, this is the event for you. We're going to provide lunch. There's going to be 5 speakers there that are going to be dynamic. Also, with your registration, we want to gift you with my new book, The Culture-neer, which kind of takes many of the concepts and thoughts that we talked about to just a whole nother level. Listen, I hope to see you there. I'm going to be there that day. I'd love to hang out with you. I'd love to meet you. Thanks again for following us here on the Culture-neer podcast. I'll see you on the 24th. Our culture is the sum total of the character of everybody that's on our team. So the question is, you need to ask yourself, what is it that you believe in? Welcome to the Culture-neer podcast. I'm going to be your host today, Terry Gwaltney, where we talk about building cultures that your employees refuse to leave and your customers can't resist. Last time we were together, we were talking about the importance of our shared values and how we get those implemented into our organization. We did that in 2 parts because, wow, this is so foundational to everything that we're going to be talking about when we're talking about culture. And we know that culture really is the secret sauce to any real successful organization. When you look and you see an organization that has a team that is just highly engaged, the customer service is over the top, the teamwork is extraordinary, the people are happy, and their business has a repeat and a referral dynamic to it, then you're seeing an organization that has a very, very healthy culture. And so, but the foundation of all that really is built on the values. And so we spent all of our time last week, talking about that. I want to recap just a little bit. And then as we end today, I'm going to give you some more, I think, practical points if you've not done it yet. I realize when we do these podcasts, we have some people, maybe you're just starting out. I had somebody reach out on LinkedIn last week out of North Carolina, and they were telling me that, they had a successful brokerage firm. Actually, this gentleman had played for 5 different NFL teams. And now he was starting a construction company. And he heard one of the podcasts, ordered the book, Culture-neer. And he said, as I'm building this construction company, I really want to focus on culture as the foundation. And so I realized we've got some people that maybe are just starting out. And while it makes the road so much easier when you begin to build the foundation with culture at the center. But I also realize there's some of us maybe that, our organizations are a little further along, and we're looking at them, it's like we need to do some repair here, or we need some attention in some areas. And it can be a little bit more challenging when you have people on board and you're turning to try to kind of change the direction of the ship, so to speak, and you have to do it little bits at a time. But wherever you're at, these core values and getting those implemented in your organization are going to be key to your long-term success. So let's do just a quick recap here. Get this pulled back up. I encourage you to take notes as we're going through today. What we value drives what we do. That was one of, I think, the key takeaways that we tried to throw out last week. Think about that. What you value drives what we do. Talked about your culture is a result of what you value. And you can look through your organization, and if you see just a high degree of excellence, in other words, good enough really is just not good enough. Just because nobody's looking doesn't mean I'm not going to do it the right way. Well, those are great indicators that you have a value of excellence and you have a value of integrity. Integrity is doing what's right when no one else is looking. Excellence is willing to go above and beyond simply because you put your name on something. And so your culture is a result of what you value. Healthy cultures never happen by accident. Your culture is a combination of what you create and what you allow. In other words, there's a lot of intentionality. There's certain things that you're going to want to create in that culture, and you're going to be very intentional about it. You're going to have to repeat it. It's much like vision. If you've ever heard the old statement, vision leaks, well, it does. You can't talk about vision too much. We can't talk about your core values too much either. You have to constantly keep those in front of your people, in front of your team, and make them the priority if you want them to become a factor in all the decision-making processes that they're going to make throughout the course of their day. Your values shape your culture, but it's also the glue that holds your team together. And so when you're assembling people, when you're interviewing people, we talked about the importance of, you need to understand what your values are before you go adding team members to your team. Do they really share your values? There's certain things that we can train and certain things that we can teach. And there's skills that can be passed on in our organizations, but values are one of those things you really want to find out if people have those before you invite them to your team. I know when we go through our interview process, there's kind of three phases of what we're looking for. And the very first one is character. We're looking for, does this person have the character that we would want to join our team, to represent us out in the world with our customers? How do you determine that character? Well, it's a series of questions, obviously, through your interview process as you're learning people's story. But really what you're trying to find out is, what do they value? What has their track record been? What's important to them? Because they're going to bring that into your organization. And of course, when we go from that, it's, do they have the competency? They may not have the experience, but, are they trainable? Do they have the competency? And then the third thing, and I think it's probably one of the most important, is chemistry. It's the culture. Even if they're competent, even if they have the values, if they don't fit with the team that you currently have, which really is that culture, it's not going to work long term. And so super, super important when we talk about culture, your values shape it, but it's also the glue that really holds your team together. Now, a couple of key takeaways from last week. Company culture describes the shared characteristics of an organization. So this is going to include your vision. It's going to include your mission. But it's also going to include attitudes, language, behaviors, and yes, your values. Organizational values are a part of the cultural foundation of an organization. So they're going to guide policies, but they're also going to guide the behaviors of everyone that's on your team. And then the third one is core values that aren't practiced in an organization. They just create cynical and disgruntled employees. They alienate customers, and they really undermine the credibility of anyone who is in leadership. So in other words, if you're going to have core values that hang on a wall, you need to make sure that you're practicing those, in public. You're practicing those with your team. You're practicing those, with your customers, because that is a surefire way to undermine and create a toxic culture by doing exactly the opposite of what you say is important to you. So, listen, if you don't stand for something, you're going to fall for anything. So what does that mean in an organization? Well, organizational core values, they guide you. It helps you make very difficult decisions. It helps you make decisions about which people to hire, which behaviors to reward, and honestly, which team members maybe need to be promoted to customers. Those values, again, they become the filter by which you're making all of these decisions on a daily basis. And if you're operating in the absence of clearly defined values, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. So in an organization, if it's not clear on their values, it's because they're not clear on their beliefs. Now, I want you to get this, because this was probably one of the biggest takeaways, I think, from the last time we were together. Your beliefs become your values. Your values, in turn, become the behaviors in your organization. So think about that with me for a minute. Beliefs, values, behaviors. So you need to make sure what you believe, what is super, super important to you, gets communicated in such a way that people know that's what you value. That's going to be the system by which you're going to reward behavior in your organization. It's also going to be the system by which you bring correction and discipline in your organization if you need to. And the end result is you will see it in the behavior of everyone that's on your team. It literally becomes the language of an organization, how we express ourselves. It's directly tied to the behavior that is deemed acceptable in the organization. It's very accumulative in nature. Again, it starts with beliefs, and then the shared values of the organization. And because they're interconnected, they in turn become the behavior, because really our culture is the sum total of the character of everybody that's on our team. So the question is, you need to ask yourself, what is it that you believe in? What's truly important to you? See, a strong culture is either going to attract people or repel them depending on its values, which is exactly what you want. Because the unity that's cultivated by shared values creates a team that's completely aligned, fully engaged, and high performing. So we wrapped up last week by talking about every person you add to your organization either adds to or takes away from the culture that you're trying to build. And you need to process and think through that because there's no decisions in our organization any more important than people decisions. Budgets are important. Long-term planning is important. But people decisions are the most important that you're going to deal with in any of our organizations, whether we're for-profit or whether we're nonprofit. Culture can only be as healthy as the leader, and your customer's experience, again, will never be greater than your employee's experience. All right, now let's pick up and take off from there. Here's what I know. If the values are unclear in the mind of the leader, they're going to be unclear in the minds of those that are trying to follow. So the beginning point always begins with you as the leader and your leadership team. And this is the part that I want to leave, that I want to really kind of march through today, is that I want you to have a very, very practical plan. I hope up to this point you understood the importance of that. But now I want to get down to just the practicality of whether maybe you don't have core values and you're just starting out, or really maybe you have some that were on a wall that maybe you or somebody else came up with because you knew it was something you should do and you should have, but it's not something that's really close to your heart. It's really not something that you're just passionate about. And you know that because half the time you can't even remember them. And so, if we can't remember them as the leaders, how we expect our people to remember them? Again, the goal is not to have a list that we can say that we have, that we can quote by memory, but it's really to have a belief system in core values that are driving behavior in the field because we're thinking through this. We've collected a group of people united around those values. And then because they're shared and we've communicated and we built a reward system around it, that's actually what's happening, when people are behind the counter or they're out in the field serving other people. So I'm going to ask you, how would you describe the personality of your organization if it was a person? This is a great way to get to fine-tuning core values or creating them. So whatever the personality was, it's been molded by beliefs and core values. So you need to be very clear on your core values so your team knows what's expected of them and what's acceptable. Your values should answer the following questions. So what do we do, or what do we as an organization stand for? So again, I encourage you to write these down. 3 questions. What do we as an organization stand for? What is non-negotiable for us? And what does a win look like? Now, these seem like very simple questions, but if you have people on your team that can't answer these, it can lead to a lot of frustration on your entire team. So 1, as an organization, what is it that you stand for? Every team member that you have should be able to tell you what you stand for. If they can't tell you, how are they communicating that with your customers? How are they doing it with a sense of passion and authenticity? It's very difficult to do. What's the non-negotiable? So I'm going to give you an idea or an example. Well, one of the organizations that I'm involved in is very much sales-driven. But one of the things that everybody knows that's non-negotiable is we don't overpromise just to get a commitment or a sale. Very common in our industry, though. People will overpromise and then underdeliver. So what is it for you? What is the non-negotiable? That becomes one of your core values. They become indicators of what your core values are. And what does a win look like? Your team needs to know, how are they going to be measured? Just because I think I was successful as that, does my supervisor think that I was successful with that? So you need to clearly define what that win looks like. So think about what's truly important to you in your organization. Your core values are the principles and the beliefs that are to guide your decisions, and you and your leaders both make. If you think generosity should be on your core values list, but as an organization, you're not very generous towards your employees or community, it's probably not a core value. So I'd suggest start by doing the following. Write down things that matter most to you. Again, this is not a mystery. Your core values are not something that you have to align with Harley Davidson or Nordstrom or Southwest Airlines. They need to align with what's important to you. They need to align with your belief system, how you conduct yourself, how you carry out business. So begin to identify them. And it really needs to happen in that way. You need to identify them. You need to begin to create a list. And then you begin to get your leaders involved in the process of that. Go back and look at your vision. Go back and look at your mission statement. All those things are going to help you identify and create a list of your values. Once you're done making your list, go back over it and narrow it down. You need fewer than 10 items on that list. Why? Because you'll never remember them. And the rest of your team won't remember them. I remember in the early days, we had core values, and man, some of them were a paragraph long. People couldn't remember. Now, we believed in them. They were important. But the reality was most of the people in our organization couldn't tell you what they were. And yes, they hung on the wall and they looked great, but they weren't driving behavior out in the field. Why? Because they were just simply too long. And it goes back to something we said earlier. If you value everything, then you really value nothing. And so when you get to this process, less is more. You just begin to boil down this process. You take this list and, okay, well, I have 30 of these things. I have 20 of these things. Now I have 10 of these things. Try to get it down to less than 10. It will focus in on the really, really big things. Like integrity is a super big word, but it bleeds over in everything you do. If integrity is doing what's right when no one's looking, then, I probably need that as a part of my business. That's a core value that I probably can't do without, okay? So it kind of becomes a pillar of one of those 5 or 6. Other thing that we did is I've refined our core values at least twice at this point in the last 15 years. The last time I did it, I boiled it down to come up with an acronym. And if you can do that, it really makes this easier too. So I took the word integrity, and then each letter represents one of our core values. So if you can create a system by which your core values align around some type of acronym, they don't have to, but that makes it much easier for the rest of your team to really be able to remember that. So begin to write this down, make it on the list. Now keep in mind, as you begin to do this, write another column next to it and begin to write like a short life-giving sentence about that value. It'll cause you to process and think back through how important that value really is to you in light of maybe the 4 or 5 that aren't going to make the list. Okay? And once you get it all on the draft paper, then I want you to invite your leadership team in to help finalize it. Now notice I didn't ask you to get your leadership team to help create it. I really personally feel like that needs to come from the leader. That needs to come from the CEO. That needs to come from the entrepreneur that started the business. That's the reason you got into business. This is what you hoped it would look like. The fact that you're having to bring other people into the mix simply means that it's been successful up to this point, but you don't want to move away from what was truly important to you. Now, at the same time, you have all these other people that have very valuable opinions. They have different strengths than what you do, which is one of the reasons why you've brought them in. But by bringing them in now to help finalize that, you've kind of put them in the right direction. Now it's time to ask for their input. And as you begin to finalize this list, what will happen now is you're getting buy-in from your leadership team. And when it comes time to take those core values and begin to figure out how am I going to drive that home to the rest of the organization, now you have a team of the most influential people in your organization that are using that influence to communicate that message out to the rest of their team. Think through, once you get that list down, to stories. Stories in your organization are one of the most powerful things. People soon forget data and they forget statistics, but stories are tied to emotions. And so if you can take a story of one of your core values, let's just say integrity was a core value you had, and somebody overpaid you by $500. And they lived an hour in a very rural area. And let's say they didn't have good internet. Their phone didn't work half the time. In other words, it was going to be a chore. They overpay you. And you find out as it's being processed through accounting that you've taken an overpayment of $500. Well, it's not as simple as just putting it in the mail. You're going to have to go out of your way to probably make a trip to go out there and hand that money back to this particular person. So a story like that, though, told reinforces how important integrity is to you. I remember one of the stories that came about in our organization is we had served this customer, and this customer a couple of years later ended up at a Home Depot, and she was locked out of her vehicle. And the story is she waited and waited and waited because she seen an integrity vehicle in the parking lot. And what she said, I knew if I could just wait to whoever was driving that integrity truck that I could get help. And we share that story because part of what we do is we look at our customers, our customer for life. And we want to create raving fans by creating what we call moments of magic. In other words, where you give a customer more than what they expected. And that's exactly what happened that day. It wasn't the salesman that had served that customer, but she knew she associated the company name with the truck and with goodwill. And if she could find them, that somehow she would get help. And at the end of the day, that's exactly what happened. We couldn't get her in her vehicle. We called a locksmith for her. The locksmith, and we paid for it, just as a goodwill gesture, and she was ecstatic and excited. Well, we tell that story over and over and over again. Why? Because it reiterates the point of what it means to create a raving fan and look for those moments of magic and the kind of goodwill that we want to create in a community. So you have that list. Come up with a story. Tell those stories as people onboard in your organization. Tell them, annually, maybe when you do a retraining. Look for opportunities when you're in your meetings, maybe on a weekly basis, to pull those out periodically. Make them become legendary. There's some great company values out there. I'd encourage you to study some of those. Nordstrom is one of those companies. They have great customer service, so their core values are inspirational if you look at them. Chick-fil-A is another one of those. Southwest Airlines. In fact, Southwest Airlines, here's one of their core values: a servant's heart. Follow the golden rule. Treat others with respect and embrace our Southwest family. Wow our customers. So part of their core values: deliver world-class hospitality, create memorable connections, and be famous for friendly service. So I'm not saying you go take someone else's core values, but I'm saying go be inspired by them. Begin to think of how did they communicate what was important to them, and then put that in your words, in your organization, so your people can begin to carry that out. Soul Cycle had this one I thought was interesting. We embrace change. We adapt, enhance, and evolve as we grow. We welcome feedback and approach every challenge with an open mind and heart. So what are your core values? What are your beliefs? What are those stories that already exist around a belief system that's already in your organization? Maybe it's just not made it to a wall. Maybe you've just not, at this point, called it a core value, but it really is. You want to take those values, guys, and weave them in to every part of your messaging, almost like a skilled weaver crafts a beautiful basket. You have to be intentional about it. It has to be a part of your reward system. It has to be repetitive, much like I said earlier, vision leaks. You got to keep it out in front of your people. You need to look for those stories that you can tell over and over and over again. Don't kid yourself. Living by organizational values, it can be difficult. It's much harder to be clear and unapologetic for what you stand for than to cave into politically correct pressures. But if you're committed to dedicate your time and energy to creating authentic core values, there's a good chance that those values will allow your organization to have a long and lasting legacy. I'm going to give you these final key takeaways as we go today. If your organization is not clear on their values, it's because they're not clear on their beliefs. As an organization, you must be willing to say no to people who aren't a good fit, so you have room to say yes to those who are. It's hard to train people in your values. You have to look for people that embody those values. share whether you are to share with you, whether that's a business or a nonprofit organization. Every person you add to your organization either adds to or takes away from the culture that you're trying to build. Keep in mind, if you value everything, you really value nothing. And people tend to forget facts and data, but not stories, because they're attached to emotions. Remember, culture can only be as healthy as the leader, and your customer's experience will never be greater than your employee's experience. We'll see you next time on the Culture-neer podcast. Hey, Terry Gwaltney from the Culture-neer podcast. Listen, I want to say thank you for listening to the podcast today. Also want to encourage you to help us get the message out to more people. If you could like, share, and review this content on wherever you consume it, if you go into YouTube or LinkedIn or just whatever your social media channels are, and you could even share it, that would be a big help to us here at the Culture-neer podcast. Also, if you'd like some more information, you can go to www.terrygwaltney.com, where we have updates. We also have more resources. We share articles there. And you also can find our new book there called The Culture-neer. Again, we want to thank you again for taking time just to listen to the podcast or view it on YouTube. It's our goal to spend 20 or 30 minutes each time we're together to help grow your culture to a point where your employees refuse to leave and your customers can't resist. This is Terry. We'll talk to you soon.